Hi, Martin. Great to have you back on the podcast.
Yes, very cool, Eric. Looking forward to this.
I can't help but I keep doing this. It's got this nice little
me too.
Scratch marks. Very metal, folks. For those, if you're listening to this book, Iron Maiden album by album, it's got this cool like scratch. I don't know. What are these, like demon claws? I don't know. What are those? I like it.
Well, I suspect it's Eddie. Yeah, Eddie was supposed to have done that, I suppose. And there's this big claw mark through, and it's embossed and
love it.
Blind embossed on. Yeah, they always do a really nice job of design on these books.
Yeah. So it's an updated version of Iron Maiden album by album. When did the original come out? And then what's new in this most recent edition?
It's a fair number of years ago. This just came up kind of out of the blue. This has been updated to include a Senjutsu chapter. So I had to go, re-interview some of the people who are the cast of this book before. So we got Marty Friedman, Kirsten Rosenberg, and Rich Davenport, for some variety there. And just as usual, go through. I'm the moderator. I just quiz them on the new album and go through every song. And it's a Q&A presentation of every album. And then, of course, new pictures, and there's new end papers and stuff like that. And, of course, a new cover. So, yeah, that's the whole idea with all of these album by album books. It's just an analysis of every studio album in a Q&A format with me as moderator, with me getting my licks in, my opinions in as well, in my asking of the questions and whatnot.
Yeah. Who's in who do you talk to? Who's on the panel? A lot of familiar names here.
Yep.
Folks that you
Brian
know.
Slagle, Tim Henderson. I got Blaze Bailey in here as well. Where's my list of panelists here? I guess we got it in the back here, maybe, eh?
I think you're right.
Bibliography. Yeah. Tim Henderson, Chris Jericho, Matt Heafy from Trivium, Jimmy K from the Metal Voice, my good buddy, Sean Kelly, who's been in a million bands, good buddy, Mike Portnoy, we all know him, Francis Potvin, Nita Strauss, Amit Zappa in here as well.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Let's see, Marty Free, Blitz from Overkill, Rich Davenport. Yeah, that's the whole cast.
Yeah, this is a small world, and more I find these names are people that I've had on. Sean Kelly's been on the podcast for his book, Don't Call It Hair Metal.
Yeah,
super nice guy, great writer too, great writer. So that's how the book's set up, and it's all about Iron Maiden, and it's obvious how much of a fan you are. You remember the dates and the record stores of the albums you bought. The albums, take us back to when you became a fan, and you were on top of each release. I mean, once it came out, you bought it. Take us back to those years, especially
that's
first
funny.
five.
I have that stuff in there because I have this book. Do you use the video at all anywhere, Eric? I can't remember. Or just straight audio?
This is video too.
Guess I was going to show you this book here quickly.
Yeah. For those listening on audio, make sure you go to YouTube. You're going to see this.
Yeah, basically, I've got this. I'm not going to flip through it, but I've got this massive book that I've had ever since I was a kid of, handwritten, all my notes of, everything I bought.
Oh my God. That's so cool.
So that's what I stuck into the introduction. But yeah, to answer your question, I was a massive metal fan all through starting in the early 70s. But when the new wave of British heavy metal rolled around, we would make our trips to Spokane, Washington, and go to Magic Mushrooms or Strawberry Jam's record store, and they were getting in Sounds magazine, which is supplanted, well, actually they went at the same time, but Kerrang later, right? So Sounds, Kerrang, you'd get the 45s, you'd have the little patch in there with the picture sleeve 45s, maybe the new albums and stuff. So yeah, I had I can't remember for sure, maybe it's in the book, but I can't remember for sure if Metal for Mothers 1 came first in terms of my ownership or the Iron Maiden debut, but I definitely remember my version of the Iron Maiden debut was the UK copy. So I bought that as an original UK release. And of course I was there for the whole Iron Maiden journey. That's not surprising. I mean, they're starting in 1980 kind of thing. So yeah, every album is a new release since. And then when Iron Maiden, of course, came out domestically, it had Sanctuary on it. The original didn't have Sanctuary on it.
But the story actually goes back to 1975. I didn't realize it goes back that far. Chris,
Yeah. They're a bit like they're one of these they're a bit like Rush, they're a bit like Judas Priest, they're even a bit like Van Halen, where there's this long lead up history with various band member changes. But Iron Maiden had ridiculous band member changes throughout all the years, right? So
yeah,
had Steve's got all kinds of people cycling in and out of the band, and it's pretty cool that he had the vision to be making this new modern heavy metal music that early. We think of them as a 1980 band, but that that band was pretty much most of the way there by 1977, 78, 79. Of course, we got the Soundhouse tapes coming out in 79. So when it comes to the new wave of British heavy metal, there's this big debate whether you should include Motorhead or not. I always totally do. But you've got Motorhead, you've got Samson with a record, you got Saxon with a record, but people forget you also have Iron Maiden with the Soundhouse tapes, which is, good quality, proper, great new wave of British heavy metal. You could tell already that this was a band that was going to be going places. And then just into early 1980, you get the debut album, and they basically become the kings of the whole roost when it comes to the new wave of British heavy metal.
Yeah. So you mentioned Steve, you're referring to Steve Harris, the bassist. So he's the original guy. Like he's the one who started it all.
Yeah, he's the boss throughout the whole thing, and there's various lead singers. We got Paul Mary O'Day at one point, right, who goes on to be in the band more, and then Wildfire. But yeah, Steve is the boss. He's writing things. He's the guy sort of cycling guys in and out. We got Dave Murray early on, but yeah, eventually we land on Paul Di'Anno. Paul Di'Anno is in there for the first and the second album and a live EP. And then Bruce Dickinson comes in. He comes in from Samson. So Bruce Dickinson is actually one of those new wave of British heavy metal guys that's there super, super early on.
Yeah.
But he comes in and the rest of the history.
And Paul Di'Anno was there longer than I realized. Like I say, 2 albums and a live album, right? 2 studio albums and a live album?
Live EP.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. And he's on the first single, Running Free.
Yeah, he's on all that original stuff, including the Soundhouse tapes. And, his whole thing was he had this great sort of growling voice, and he was considered a little bit of he came from a bit of a punk background. So he had the iconic black leather jacket, the slightly shorter hair than the other guys. It's a bit of a wild man, right? We know he's still going. I just interviewed him a couple months ago. And, but yeah, he's in there and eventually, I think the guy's become essentially kind of scared of his lifestyle and almost like he's not taking care of himself. He's not improving. Maybe his attitude isn't quite there for loving this kind of heavy metal music. And then Bruce Dickinson just fits perfectly into the band.
It was like he was made for the band. He should have been there from the start. Yeah. Running Free. Do you agree with that release? The label released it, and the guys on the panel pretty much universally say it had the most commercial appeal. Do you agree with that release as a first single?
Yeah, I suppose so. I never really thought about it. I mean, it's a bit of a stilted, awkward, galloping, tribal kind of rhythm to it, but the sentiment of it and the chorus of it are commercial enough sounding, right? So this Running Free, the youth, the new heavy metal army sort of thing. It all lines up. It's short enough. It's not some crazy epic. So yeah, I guess it is a good choice for a single, as is Sanctuary. That's a good anthemic sort of rocker too. So these sorts of things, I suppose, feel more like a single than Iron Maiden. Well, Iron Maiden is not bad either, but Transylvania or whatever. There's other songs obviously that are less single like, but Running Free, yeah, good punky anthemic, straight between the eyes rocker.
We talked about Steve Harris being there from day one. We got to talk about Eddie. Let's talk Eddie. He was there pretty much from the beginning. He was the band's mascot, right? And there's the interesting story of how it all started. It was like he was just like a paper mache mask used in a stage backdrop, and then they just said, let's make him the mascot, and then they made there was an artist, Derek Riggs is the artist who created it. But my question to you though is, how important do you think is the character of Eddie to the band? Because they made a lot of money, right? The merchandise, the t-shirts, the posters, the action figures.
Yeah, totally important. I think it was, and there's an even deeper significance to the idea that first album cover. And I remember thinking this immediately when I saw it, was that you really did have a new sort of really garish, what's inside is definitely going to look like what's on the tin kind of feel, to seeing this ghoulish neon green roughly illustrated monster on the cover, and that sort of signified or lined up or paralleled with the whole idea of the new wave of British heavy metal, where it's like, we are now proud to be and proud to look heavy metal, whereas in the old days, as I often say, Black Sabbath essentially looked like the Eagles, and so did the album covers. The album covers weren't particularly heavy metal. I mean, they looked like Eagles album covers or whatever, right? Doobie Brothers, so Foghat, all these bands, there was no sort of unified heavy metal image, and I think Eddie was one of the great early examples of the fact that we're going to move into cartoony illustration somewhat, right? Tigers of Pantang with Wildcat and Quartz Stand Up and Fight, and you essentially had this look, and of course, yeah, you have this mascot that aligns with the stage show, and eventually, or quite soon, you've got people dressing up as Eddie, Rhodey, or whatever, coming on stage, and that's cool, and it's perfect for t-shirts, the ink colors and all that. You've got the red and black and white of the Iron Maiden logo, and it goes with this neon green thing, and that printed up nicely on a black t-shirt. So they're off to the races, and then Eddie is used as this great, a brand, essentially, an extension of the logo itself that you see on all the album covers. And it just becomes this amazing merchandising tool that they've exploited basically better than probably anything in all of rock and roll. It's probably the number one greatest, most extensively used over years and years and decades, merchandising idea. I guess rivaled by Kiss, right?
I was going to say Kiss,
yeah. Kiss and Eddie are probably the two at the top of the food chain.
The coolest was the poster. They had a poster. If you had a white door, it worked perfectly. My brother had the poster of Eddie, and it looked like he's coming through the door. So if you had a white door, it was a white poster, and it was so cool. So cool. And then you had me looking at the Women in Uniform single. That's when you see him, like you, right, in all his glory. That was released around Halloween 1980, and that's he's that green, like I said, like almost like he's glowing in green. It's the full head to toe Eddie.
Yeah, Derek played kind of loose and fast with him, right? I mean, essentially that first Eddie was like a pre-existing piece of artwork, and it was actually based on like a literal shrunken head that was stuck on a tank in, I think, the Vietnam War. Is where Derek came up with that. But the first Eddie looked much different when you got to the second official Eddie. I say official on an album cover Eddie on Killers. And then Eddie kind of looked different again on Number of the Beast. So Derek wasn't being all that precise in getting the personality of that face to match Eddie to Eddie. But the other cool thing that he started doing is he started having things done to Eddie, where, he's getting the lobotomy on Peace of Mind, and then he's kind of like this disembodied spiritual thing on Seventh Son. And, you got the futuristic. So the futuristic Eddie on Somewhere in Time is still the lobotomy Eddie. So, Derek had this kind of neat idea that Eddie, he might look like a scary monster, but he's sort of part fan as well. And he's part of the fan base, and you can imagine him being in the pit, but he's also, even though he's a monster and can do acts of evil or violence, he's taking a lot of hits at the same time. And he's getting chopped up and having these injuries done to him as time goes on. So that was a cool thing, Derek.
Makes him a likable character. Yeah. Let's talk about the Di'Anno years a little bit before we move into that phase of the band where they're most popular with Bruce Dickinson. The two albums that he made, you're a fan of. So it's not like, obviously Bruce Dickinson was a perfect fit for the band, but you like those first two albums, and I think
Yeah,
the panel.
everybody does. There's no Iron Maiden fan that doesn't like those records at all. They're both really cool. And the first one's a little rougher. It's got Will Malone producing on it. It's maybe a little thin, a little rough. Um, and the funny thing is, I remember distinctly feeling this in 1980 that the better band of the two, the best band of the new bands was Angel Witch. It wasn't Iron Maiden. But quickly that all changed because by the time you got to Killers, there were so many great ideas, and you've got the Martin Birch production on there. They grew by leaps and bounds. And by that point, you basically we came to the realization that there was no better new wave of British heavy metal band than Iron Maiden by having the evidence of two albums at this point, and then a third immediately in 82. They were well off to the races. The obvious competition is Motorhead and Saxon, maybe Tigers of Pantang as well. And then you've got the older guard who are, you got the really old guard, like your Sabbaths and stuff still going, although they've changed. You've got the slightly newer guard, like your Judas Priest, they're going along, and Scorpions is there. Everybody's, it's a great time to be a metal band. Ozzy Osbourne's having a hit band at the same time. But yeah, sure, those first two albums, everybody loves them, and they still play lots and lots of songs off of them. And we're all well accustomed to Bruce Dickinson singing all those songs now. So yeah, just good quality couple of first two albums.
Right, it was a self-titled debut, and then 1981 was Killers, which has Twilight Zone. That's a cool tune.
Yeah, Wrathchild's amazing on that.
Purgatory,
Rue Morgue. Yeah.
Yep. Martin Popoff is the author of Iron Maiden album by album, the new edition out September 10th. So I think it's going to be out by the time this episode runs. So seems as if Bruce Dickinson, like I said, he was meant to be the guy from the start. Just took a little while for Steve Harris to find him. How did he end up joining?
Well, they knew him from Samson, and they talk about this apocryphal meeting at Reading out in the field between Bruce and their manager Rod Smallwood. But basically, and the way Bruce talks about it, I believe, if I recall correctly, like he saw that band and he says, that's the band I want to be in. Those guys look like they're really going places. There were always problems with Samson and Paul Samson. Samson was considered to be a band that was maybe a little behind the times, not looking to the future of heavy metal. Paul had a real kind of love of 70s rock and stuff. But, I maintain that Samson's Shock Tactics, the last one before Bruce leaves, is an absolute masterpiece. It's gorgeously recorded. I've even said it might be Bruce's greatest album in terms of greatest vocal performance ever, but that's arguable. I mean, singing is singing, but it is a really, really good album. But yeah, I think Bruce kind of could see that maybe the pieces in the Samson band individually or collectively weren't as talented as these pieces he was seeing in this firecracker of a band, Iron Maiden, who were obviously getting a lot of attention, and now Iron Maiden is having problems with their lead singer. And the other thing, yeah, I mean, I didn't even think of this, but right off the bat, Iron Maiden is clearly already a pretty darn successful band. And much more successful than Samson. So yeah, Bruce, I think could see the writing on the wall that even right off the bat, it was a step up in terms of, his financial situation and business situation, because Iron Maiden already was a very, very exciting band that everybody was talking about.
And his first album, Number of the Beast, March of 82, that came out. Tell me about the studio. It was haunted? That was the story?
Yeah,
Battery Studios.
I believe they talked about that a little bit. And I remember the other thing, they all feel about that album is that the studio was kind of like antiquated equipment, and this album was done really quickly. So it's a little bit loose and fast, but that's part of its charm as well. And the ideas are still coming fast and furious. They've got as many good ideas on this album as they do on the previous album. Hallowed Be Thy Name is considered still to this day maybe Iron Maiden's greatest song of all time. It's certainly got all the characteristics. They would do many songs like Hallowed Be Thy Name as time went on, but I love 22 Acacia Avenue on there, and Prisoner. I'm not a big fan of the title track, and there's a couple other songs people complain about on that album a little bit, like Gangland. I'm not a big Run to the Hills fan either, but yeah, absolutely great album. And so now they've got 3 albums in the new wave of British heavy metal that everybody loves.
Well, what would the band be though without Run to the Hills? I mean, because that was what introduced them to a wide audience. So, is it that important a song for the band?
Well, sure it is, but all these what if situations. I mean, if that song hadn't existed, some other band song would have been the single, and they would have pushed it just as hard, and it probably would have done just as well, right? I just find it. I really don't like that frantic galloping beat of the thing, and I think the story's a little naff, as they would say in the UK. So yeah, that one just seems a little how almost like silly and punky, I suppose. Right. And and Steve, if he was sitting here listening to us, he doesn't ever want to be called punky. So he would agree that punky is a pejorative that you don't want to be called, I suppose.
Well, here's your excerpt on the Battery Studios being possibly haunted. The Number of the Beast was rush recorded on antiquated equipment at Battery Studios in the space of 5 weeks. Stories abound of the studio lights flickering on and off, and equipment inexplicably going on the fritz. And then there was Martin Birch's van accident with a group of nuns, with the repair bill coming in at 666 euros. 666. How wild is that? Follow-up album, 1983's Peace of Mind. You write, quote, not since Led Zeppelin has a drummer put such a stamp on a band as Nicko McBrain. He replaced Clive Burr. So first, why was Clive out of the band? And second, how important, in your opinion, is Nico's arrival?
Yeah, I think it's somewhat parallel to the Attitude situation, maybe of Paul Di'Anno. Nico's arrival is really interesting because I don't feel like Nico had a particular complete stamp or style before this. Playing with Trust or Pat Travers Band or whatever. But he arrives, and he immediately has this great sound, this great drumming style, this kind of in the pocket, around the horn with the toms, a great tom sound. We get to hear him be really highly technical right away with Where Eagles Dare. So what I love about that album, and why it's my favorite Iron Maiden album, is you get this excitement of having all these great personalities in the band. You've got personality from the guitar end of thing with the trademark twin leads. You've got personality with Steve Harris and his bass playing and his writing and his lyric writing. You've got great personality with this amazing lead singer. And now you've even got personality out of the drummer. So I think that's one of the cool things about Iron Maiden is they were just like brimming with personality in all departments of the heavy metal machine kind of thing. And you hear that, throughout that record.
A couple singles, Flight of Icarus and The Trooper. The Trooper's still a big one. The Trooper still gets played a lot.
Oh yeah, radio. That's probably their most famous song, I would say. And it's also famous, and it's well loved as well. And it's also famous, and it's well loved, and it's really a lot like Iron Maiden. So they have a lot of songs that use a lot of the cool tricks that Trooper, including the amazing twin lead in it, right?
I think you said this is your favorite, or that you feel this is the best Maiden album. Peace of Mind?
I feel that way. I think it's probably my favorite Maiden album. So they're building up to it. I mean, I love, almost every single Iron Maiden album, or I put it this way, I like a lot, pretty much every single Iron Maiden album. But yeah, this I think is my favorite because, this is the last one where I feel like Power Slave. And I remember thinking this the moment I heard it. I liked it a lot. And I love it, actually. I mean, it's a great, great album. But I think I love it and like it a lot because it really was Peace of Mind Part 2, or Mark 2, Part 2. Just the same way that Master of Puppets, the moment I heard that, I thought, this is like ticking a lot of the same boxes as Ride the Lightning. They're both amazing records, but, it's kind of a similar album. So Power Slave was the first time I felt like, this is very much like Peace of Mind. And then they had settled into their sound and never changed their sound ever again, which is kind of interesting. I feel like basically when you arrive at Peace of Mind, every single Iron Maiden from that point forward smartly, actually, because of all that great personality in the band. They kind of come up with a formula and they never change it ever again.
Yeah, I never even thought about that. That's kind of like AC/DC. Right? They never changed with the times. They just stayed true to their sound from that point forward.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Power Slave had 2 Minutes to Midnight, which is a great song. Aces High. 1986, Somewhere in Time featured Wasted Years, Stranger in a Strange Land. And 1988, Seventh Son of a Seventh Son. Now, this is the one where if you were to take a poll of Iron Maiden fans, I think most would say, right, this is the best among the fan base.
Well, that's interesting because you're right. I am starting to hear that a lot, and I'm always surprised by that. I really don't think people would say it's the best. You know, obviously, what happens is the slightly younger Iron Maiden fan might gravitate to that in the same way that I do hear a lot of people say Heaven and Hell is the greatest Black Sabbath album. So I have heard that, yes, a lot of times. But overwhelmingly, I hear people say Peace of Mind is the best. Okay. And after that, I would say people say Number of the Beast is the best, second best. Famously, Brian Slagle, Number of the Beast is his favorite album by anybody of all time.
Right? All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's high praise.
And I hear Power Slave. Sometimes I hear Killers. So Seventh Son to me probably is going to come in fourth or fifth, really, if you took a massive survey of everybody. But it is really interesting that, if you're in your 40s and 50s, I definitely hear Seventh Son mentioned quite a bit.
Yeah, that has Can I Play with Madness, The Evil That Men Do, and The Clairvoyant. I think those are the three singles. Now, this, I almost forgot to ask you about this. You say 2 Minutes to Midnight is your favorite Maiden song of all time. Mm-hmm. What puts it ahead of other classic Maiden songs? Because there are quite a few.
I just love that it's got some Samson to it. It's got some rock and rollsiness. That's how I always describe it, rock and rollsy. And people have said that about, and it's almost oversaid now because I think everybody gets it from me. But I've always called Adrian Smith the rock and rollsy guy in the band, and it's not true really, because when you go later on into the 2000s albums and stuff, it's actually hard to distinguish who's who in that band when it comes to the personalities. But yeah, to me, it's just got a little bit of 70s to it. It's got some groove. It's got a little bit more of a traditional riff to it. I love the story. I love the parts. It's just a cool. It's like a 3 beer Iron Maiden song rather than a scholarly Iron Maiden song.
Yeah. Iron Maiden in the 90s. It starts with 1990's No Prayer for the Dying and then follows with 92's Fear of the Dark. Bruce Dickinson is out of the band after that album. What led to his departure?
Yeah, the 90s is a bit of a fallow period. I think most people wouldn't say No Prayer for the Dying or Fear the Dark are particularly good albums. And then most people wouldn't say the 2 Blaze albums aren't particularly good albums. So I think Bruce is a little bit, I did a History in 5 Songs with Martin Popoff podcast episode calling Bruce Dickinson and Rob Halford doppelgangers, right? Because the career path is just insanely similar, right? And as is the Iron Maiden and Judas Priest career path. But essentially what happens is I think Bruce is realizing that his band isn't making that good music and we're not really moving forward and we're just doing the same thing over and over again and kind of like inferior versions of it, right? There's a lot of deep tracks on No Prayer and Fear of the Dark that people have a lot of disdain for, right? So Bruce is like any good artist saying, I gotta make a bold move here. I gotta do something more interesting than this. So he goes off and does a solo career and does some really, really good music that fans just love out of that guy. Right. So yeah, he's out of the band, just sowing his creative oats, so to speak. And then Iron Maiden goes into this long, agonizing period, just like Judas Priest, where it takes them a long time to get a new singer. And they come back with 2 albums that confirm Bruce's, suspicions that the songwriting has really kind of gone down the tubes and we're not really coming up with anything new. And basically the X Factor and Virtual 11 are dimmer versions of No Prayer for the Dying and Fear of the Dark. So they have this period where, the recordings aren't very good. The songs are getting long, but for no good reason.
Were those on
And
smaller labels too? Were those two albums?
yeah, and they're moving down into theaters, and there's antagonism with the fans, and Steve is up there giving the finger to the fans if the fans are like getting on Blaze's back, and Blaze turns out to be a guy that doesn't have the same kind of voice as Bruce, so he's not doing the high stuff as much. Yeah, it just turns out to be not a great period for the band. And like Judas Priest, but first before Judas Priest, there's the big hoopla of the reunion with Bruce, and they come back stronger than ever.
Yeah, they did the X Factor in 95, Virtual 11 in 98 with Blaze Bayley on lead vocals. Yeah, not easy to replace Bruce Dickinson. That is kind of what I think David Lee Roth was thinking when he left Van Halen. Like, I'll be back someday, because that's really the way things normally go. Like, I think it's a good move for Bruce to do what he did from an artistic standpoint. He's able to do things he wanted to do, but then if you step away for a while, the fans look forward to your return even more so. But you point out in the book, it wasn't like when he came back, it was an immediate, oh my God, Bruce is back in Maiden and they're selling out, huge arenas. That took a couple of years. Mm-hmm. Brave New World came out in 2000, has the Wicker Man on it. Really cool single. But as you know, in the book, it took a few years for Maiden to become big again. When did things start to pick up for the band? And what do you credit for Iron Maiden's resurgence?
Yeah, that's a fascinating story, because I remember seeing all this, and I was there seeing Iron Maiden on the Brave New World tour in Massey Hall in Toronto, which is it's a venerable theater that fits about 2,200. So yeah, he comes back. Metal is in not a great place. So even the whole story of Bruce coming back was kind of a limited thing. I mean, it was massive with our magazine, Brave Words and Bloody Knuckles, and that whole period was great. But it does take a couple of years. Dance of Death comes out in 2003. Matter of Life and Death, which is considered one of the better ones, 2006. So that whole 2003, 4, 5 period feels like that's when this massively inspiring story of this band coming back and playing bigger and bigger venues. And, I almost feel like it starts with like the Shed tours of the summers and stuff, because I remember,
right? Wasn't he? They were on
okay,
Ozfest,
yeah. But I remember, specifically interviewing Bruce backstage at Molson Amphitheater for the Dance of Death, Matter of Life and Death tour, I believe it was, and having a full size crowd there at that thing, 16,000 that place holds. But you ask what I credit. I credit the idea of them being valid by constantly making new music, but that's really a small part of it. I think also you got to credit the ongoing merchandise value and just the machine of Eddie. But the main thing I credit, I think, is the fact that those guys all stayed athletic and put on an amazing show, and Bruce could still sing, and he's running around the stage, and so is everybody's up there just giving her. They stayed scandal free and drug free and all that stuff. It was just this inspiring version of the band that wow, these guys can still deliver the goods. So I think it's their reputation as an amazing live band more than anything. But put the the prongs together, the 3-prong, the devil's trident approach, or whatever you want to call it. You got the live show, you got them being a valid band by making new music, and you've got this great merchandising machine to go along with it.
I saw them in 05 on the Ozfest tour, and they were amazing. Mm-hmm. But I also think too, a lot of those younger metal bands were starting to talk about Iron Maiden's influence on them, and so the younger generation of fans hear that name and say, okay, let's check them out. I think that had a lot to do with it as well. And then you had The Final Frontier 2010, Book of Souls 2015, and Sunjitsu 2021, which is now in the latest edition of the book, Iron Maiden album by album, right? Yeah.
Yep.
So your opinion of Iron Maiden's work over the last few decades? Not a band running on fumes.
No, not running on fumes. And again, they just maintain. They're probably even bigger than they ever were. I would argue. And and what I think is amazing is when you think of who are the two biggest metal bands in existence, you think of Metallica and Iron Maiden. So they're literally, number one or number two, right? probably number 2, right? But still, just a massive band. I quite like what they've done over the last while. I think consensus does seem to be coalescing around A Matter of Life and Death as being their greatest album of the modern era. But I'm quite a fan of Book of Souls and Final Frontier, less so Senjutsu. There's been a lot of complaints about Senjutsu and the idea that they just keep making longer and longer songs that aren't particularly progressive. They just happen to be long with a lot of repetition and stuff. So, I'm that guy. I'm that fan, that Def Leppard fan who thinks they never did anything ever good again after Pyromania, blah, blah, blah. I'm that fan of Maiden that would want, I would love to see it get through to them that, wow, wouldn't it be cool to have an album with 12 4-minute songs on it, kind of thing, right? Just give us that heavy, because there's flashes of that on all of these albums, which I just really love. But yeah, credit to them for keeping on doing this and keeping on leaving the new songs in the set. Because frankly, Iron Maiden has some really, really deep scholarly fans, and those guys don't want to hear the same old hits over and over again. They appreciate that through time. Steve's up there delivering the new music, and as time moves on and we look back on these things, and they put a lot of live albums, it's great to see that we will have forevermore live versions of all these deep cuts from these later albums.
Let's finish out with the current state of the band. I mean, is Nico okay? I know Nicko McBrain had some health issues. What's going on with Iron Maiden?
There's very little in the news. One of the funny, amusing things about them is somebody was saying, "Is that really news?" When Steve comes out and says, "We aren't working on a new album right now," right? Yeah. So it's funny, but we've had British Lion along the ways. This is probably, come to think of it, you're asking that question. I've never really thought about this, but this might be the least bit of Iron Maiden news time period over a bunch of months that I've ever seen. So there's very little being talked about Iron Maiden. That usually means they are working on a new album. That's one of the cool things about this band. They will just spring this on you almost at some point, which is kind of cool. And I don't put it past them to do that. So what is it? Senjutsu, September 2021. So it's now we're 3 full years since Senjutsu already. So that's kind of interesting. But no, I don't think there really is particularly any new news on the band.
Yeah, Nico had a stroke, but he's recovering.
Yes.
He's paralyzed on his right side, but he's recovering. It looks like they still have him listed as a current member of the band. So that's good to hear. Iron Maiden album by album, the latest edition, it's out September 10, and you can find it wherever books are sold. Also, people can go to your website. Do you offer the signed copies of this book, Martin, through your website?
Yep. I definitely, anything that is in print, I keep stock of it myself. Like a big part of my job is being a mail order guy of my own stuff. So I'm signing everything, sending them all out. I've signed lots of these and sent them out already. Right now it's not, well, actually by the time this airs, it will be properly at my website. But right now you can go to where the old edition is. It's all the same prices, and just hit the PayPal button and buy it. But I think I'm going to delete that and put up the new edition. So there's PayPal buttons, buy now buttons for America, Canada, international. And yeah, I'll sign them and send them out.
Well, if all goes as planned, this episode, people will be listening to this on the day of the release, September 10, if not very close. So as always, Martin, thanks. Let's plug the website, martinpopoff.com, and also the podcast, whatever you want to let the people know.
Yeah, History in 5 Songs with Martin Popoff. Anywhere you get your podcasts, I'm up to 270 episodes of that.
Wow.
I've got a new one that I do with John Gaffney called Kicked in the Teeth, an AC/DC podcast.
Oh,
We've
okay.
got a video show, The Contrarians, as well. And yeah, book-wise, I just had out Rainbow, Run with the Wolf, Rainbow on Record, which is a panel book just like this one, although it's more of a trade paperback. It's not full color throughout and hardcover like this is. And then shortly it's going to look just as good as this one. We've got Judas Priest album by album coming out shortly.
Tell me about this Kicked in the Teeth podcast. I'm a huge AC/DC fan. This is cool.
Yep.
When did this
John
launch?
Gaffney, who has this great YouTube channel called Lair of the Alchemist, and he also does a Black Sabbath podcast for Pantheon. But it was John's suggestion that we do an AC/DC podcast, so we're up to about 8 episodes now. We don't do them. Yeah. My podcast I do every week, but this one we do about every 3 weeks. So we're
all right,
about 8 episodes.
Well, you have a new subscriber. I am going to yeah, it looks like it started back in the spring, I think in March, maybe March or April. Okay. Yeah. Nice. Love AC/DC. All right, Martin. Thanks again. Always love having you on. We'll have you on soon again, I'm sure. So
all right. Thanks very much, Eric. Very cool. Always a pleasure.